Welcome to the first episode of Filmmaking Friday, the series where we explore filmmaking from the bloody basics to professional. Today we're going to start with the first thing you need when you want to get into filmmaking, a camera.
Filmmaking Friday.
People ask me all the time, which camera should I buy? Now that's not a simple question, because you have to take into consideration many things, like what's your budget, what's your intended use of the camera, do you have a brand preference, Canon, Sony, definitely not Nikon, just kidding, he's not. What about the ease of use of the camera? Do you need lens compatibility and different options in that field? Do you need autofocus or are you a manual guy? Do you want 4K, 8K, 1080p probably isn't for debate anymore? Do you want to shoot in slow motion? Are you looking for bokeh, so a blurry background? Do you need built-in NDs, image stabilization? Are you interested in different codecs? What about sensor size, megapixels, low light, native ISOs? Do you need a flip screen? What about the look of the footage, the body shape, the look of the camera itself, the battery life and options, and media? Whoa, that was a lot. Let's quickly answer all of these questions. Now, all of these different factors correlate with each other, so it's maybe a bit messed up, but I tried to structure it as good as possible. There are a lot of different questions you have to ask yourself when buying a camera. Here's some food for thought. So let's start with the budget. How much do you want to spend? I always say if you don't want to spend more than 400 or 500 euros on a camera, just film with your phone. If you have an iPhone. Not if you have a Samsung, but if you have an iPhone, just film with that. Intended use. Determine the primary purpose of the camera. Are you buying it mainly for videography or for photography? Maybe a hybrid camera for both? Are you going to create casual snapshots, either video or photography, professional work, vlogging, travel, or something else? Different cameras are made for different usages. So first, knowing what you want to do with the camera is very important. This first thing, the intended use of the camera, maybe with a bit of thinking, is going to basically answer all the questions we're going to have to ask ourselves. What about brands? I would say Sony is still dominating nowadays. Maybe that'll change in the future. Canon was definitely dominating in the beginning of DSLR video shooting. Nikon is okay for photos. I personally would not recommend it for video at all. And of course, there are some special brands like Fujifilm, Panasonic, Olympus, Pentax, Leica, which all have their own benefits and drawbacks. The reason I wouldn't choose any of these brands are mainly lens compatibility and accessories. Panasonic has great options with its GH series, but we're going to talk about that in the sensor section. Next, let's talk about ease of use. Pretty simple. If you're a starter, choose a camera that is easy to use so you learn the basics, but choose a camera that has an all manual option so you have the possibility to learn to do it yourself. A lot of cameras have all auto options, but that just won't do it for professional work, if that's what you want to do in the long run. I could be going over if you want a camera that is not easy to use at all, shoots raw and has a million buttons, but then you probably wouldn't be watching this video, so just buy a Red or Arri then. Lens compatibility. I just mentioned it when it came to the brands. Different camera brands have different lens options. Canon had the widest range for the longest time. Sony is also right up there, so keep that in mind when choosing a camera. Autofocus. Some love it, some hate it. I used to never use it. I actually started filmmaking just using manual focus, but I frequently use autofocus nowadays because it's really good at this point. Of course, it depends on the situation, but if I'm running my A7S III on the gimbal, I just keep it on autofocus 99% of the time. So if you're planning to do that as well, or film yourself a lot like I'm doing right now, maybe look into a camera with good autofocus capabilities. Next point, image resolution. It's 2023, so I'm not gonna talk about 1080p, but 4K. Is 4K enough for you, or do you want to shoot future-proof in, for example, 6 or 8K? Are you, for example, looking to produce for, I don't know, Netflix someday, or an ad that runs in a cinema where you have some specifications? Be sure to think about that as well. Do you want to shoot slow motion a lot? Are you just going to shoot real time in 24 FPS and the occasional 60 FPS slow-mo, or do you want to shoot in 120, 240, or even more FPS? A lot of cameras shoot in higher frame rates nowadays, but the downside is just at lower resolutions. You might shoot in 960 FPS, but if it's just in 480p, like for example on the RX 100 Mark V, it's not really suitable to use it in a professional high quality video. If you just want to shoot slow-mo like these slow-mo guys, just buy a phantom camera. What about blur and bokeh? Do you want to shoot cinematic videos with a blurry background? Look into DSLRs or mirrorless cameras with a full frame sensor. More about that in the sensor section. Or do you just want to shoot reality TV news footage style videos? Then you can just use a camcorder. Maybe you don't already know this, but if you want to shoot with a blurry background during the day and not just at night, you need an ND filter. Some have them built in, some don't. Most of them don't. A basic beginner camera won't have built-in ND, so you have to use a screw-on one. A big professional RAD camera most often also doesn't have one because they use a matte box with NDs. Some cameras, like the FX6, have one, even one that you can change seamlessly, which was very important to me and indeed one of the many reasons why I choose it as my main camera. Image stabilization. Are you traveling and shooting with just the camera in your hand? Maybe you need image stabilization in your camera, not just in the lens. The A7S III, for example, has 5-axis in-body stabilization, so if you shoot travel videos with it, if you have a somewhat steady hand, you won't have micro jitters. Again, if you're planning on just shooting on a gimbal, maybe you don't need it. With my FX6, I only shoot on a tripod or handheld, so it's okay for me if it doesn't have image stabilization. Codecs. Are you shooting just for social media? Are you shooting for Netflix? Are you shooting for cinema? Is H.264 or 5 okay? Do you want to shoot in ProRes, or do you maybe even need to shoot in RAW? The better the codec, the more flexibility during post-production. Sensor size. There are different sensor sizes with different amount of megapixels. The three most common types of camera sensor sizes are full frame, APS-C or micro four thirds. Full frame is the biggest one out of them, which means it has the best low light capabilities, the blurriest background, but only full frame lenses work with it. APS-C is the sensor used in most beginner cameras. It can take all the lenses, so of course APS-C lenses and all of the full frame lenses. However, an APS-C sensor has drawbacks like, for example, a 1.5 crop, so a 35mm now becomes a 50mm lens, which can be a drawback or even an advantage if you want to shoot, for example, wildlife, which is far away. Depends on what you want to use it for. Also, it's not as good in low light as a full frame one. And that's why, as I already mentioned in the camera brand section, would never choose a Panasonic camera, because they most often have a micro four thirds sensor, which is even smaller. Which brings us to the next section, low light. I personally shoot in a lot of dark places, and I very often shoot without being able to bring many lights, so it's very important for me to at least have a camera that is very capable in low light, hence the full frame sensor. Most Sony cameras are known for their good low light capabilities. The a7S II was the best low light camera at its time. The a7S III of course is amazing in that field as well. It's basically a night vision device, and the FX6 has a dual native ISO, which basically means it has two ISOs at which it has the least noise. That's just mind-blowing. Do you need a flip screen? If you want a camera for professional filmmaking, that's basically not important, because most often you will have an external monitor anyways. But if you want to film yourself for YouTube, if you're vlogging, you need a flip screen. Some cameras like the a7S II have a flip screen, but you still can't see yourself. Some cameras like the a7S III or the RX100 series have proper flip screens. What about the look, body shape and the look of the camera itself? That might sound like the least important thing, but it is something to take into consideration as well. First, the look and body shape of the camera. Do you prefer a classic retro look like the Fujifilm and Sony cameras? Do you want a more modern design, or do you just simply not care? If you want to shoot handheld a lot, just a camera itself won't do the job. You would have to build a rig around the camera, add some weight and stuff like a monitor to do proper handheld shooting. A Sony FX6 or Blackmagic Ursa on the other hand already has the shape for proper handheld filmmaking. When it comes to the look of the camera in front of clients, I made the experience that size does matter. The bigger the camera, the better the impression the client has. It's just true. This camera basically is not much different from this one, generally speaking. On paper at least. It's not just basically the same quality, but also not that much of a difference in the price point. But this one is tiny and this one is huge. Don't get this wrong, of course there is a difference, but generally speaking. So when I pull out this one, the client is like, whoa, I could have done that myself, or are you just taking photos? I thought we were gonna shoot a video. On the other hand, when I pull out this one, the client is like, whoa, that's what I pay for. This is some Hollywood type shit. You're like the German Steven Spielberg. That's what they called me when I just pulled out this camera without even doing anything. I haven't shot anything, I haven't edited anything, and they haven't seen any footage from me, but they just called me. They just thought I'm a good filmmaker because the camera was big. Size doesn't matter. Back when I had my a7S II with a rig, it was a bit of both basically. It's built out and big, but it still has a small body if you look a little bit closer. Batteries and battery life. Some cameras use proprietary batteries, while others use more widely available ones. If you shoot events, feature films where the camera runs all day, maybe you should buy a camera with big V-mount batteries. Not all cameras have V-mount batteries, but with most of them you can adapt them. The a7S III has batteries that last a good amount of time. The a7S II and Blackmagic cameras on the other hand are known for their short battery life. Maybe you're in a controlled environment, like for example inside, where you can just use a dummy battery, so battery life won't matter. Battery life does matter. Hold on. Also with the Blackmagic cameras you can adapt V-mount batteries, but the ergonomics are still just garbage in the end, at least in my opinion. Don't find me on that one, Blackmagic users. I'm just talking about the Blackmagic cinema camera. As I just stated, the Blackmagic Ursa Mini looks great. With the FX6 and for example the tilter cage, not sponsored, you can easily adapt V-mount batteries, even though the batteries it comes with would be fine as well. Media. Also something you have to think about when it comes to the budget. As I have mentioned many times in this video, own the Sony FX6. This FX6 setup with all the accessories I have on it was over $10,000. Because the more expensive the camera will get, the more expensive the accessories will get as well. And for me, that was most notable with the media. You might look at the price tag of the body of the cheapest Red and be like, $6,000? I can afford that. Let's get one. This memory card of the FX6 with 160 gigabytes, which lets me record 83 minutes of 4K 24 FPS footage, costs $340. This is a small piece right here. That's one card. If you want to shoot an entire day, you have to get a few spare cards, which will quickly add up to a bunch of several $1,000s. And all of a sudden a $6,000 body isn't $6,000 anymore. Now this was just the tip of the iceberg. There is a lot to consider when buying a camera. It's very exciting, especially if it's your first one. Also, this was for cameras in general. Of course, there are even more special cameras for special usages. If you want to capture action sports, of course you need a GoPro. If you're doing fashion photography, maybe use a Hasselblad camera. One more last example that I wasn't able to fit in the rest of the video. How long does it take to turn your camera on? You can buy a RAD camera, but if you're shooting an event where you have to quickly capture stuff that happens without you knowing it first, and it takes 45 seconds for your camera to boot up once you press the on button, you probably missed the thing that was happening. So if you're shooting an event, even if you can afford a RAD, it's probably not the right option. I hope this video gave you at least a small insight into the different factors you need to consider when buying a camera. If you need some more tips or have questions, feel free to leave them down below in the comments or hit me up on Instagram, also linked down below in the description. If you enjoyed the video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up as it helps the channel, and also consider subscribing right here for more videos just like this one. Also be sure to tune in next Filmmaking Friday where we answer the question of which lens to buy, or tune in this Sunday for another main video on the channel, and I will hopefully see you in the next video. Goodbye.